In early 1861, the Alabama fire eater William Lowndes Yancey was tired but satisfied. The previous summer, he had led the Southern walkout at the Democratic Convention, splitting the last remaining national political party in the U.S. This maneuver ensured the election of Abraham Lincoln, the nominee of the Northern Sectional Republican Party, but that lent urgency to the cause he'd been working toward for a decade, secession. Yancey and other fire eaters were able to stoke enough fears of Republican domination that secession conventions in 7 of the slaveholding states, including Alabama, voted to leave the Union and form a Southern Confederacy. Best of all, Yancey's city of Montgomery was to be the provisional capital and was thus experiencing a population explosion as delegates and office seekers swarmed the hitherto sleepy southern town. Yancey, who'd had his financial ups and downs, now owned a dairy farm and was set to make a mint selling milk to all those new arrivals. "I have no idea of ever again returning to public life," Yancey wrote his brother Ben. "Let other men figure out how to run the new country he'd helped create." But it turned out the new president had an unlikely assignment in mind for Yancey. For some reason, Jefferson Davis picked Yancey, a notorious hothead, a fierce champion of slavery, and one of the most inflammatory orators of his generation, to head up a 3-man mission to Europe seeking recognition and aid. And for some reason, Yancey, whose brother and one friend after another told to turn down the job, that he was being set up to fail, said yes. Historian William C. Davis writes that the president's inability to delegate hindered Yancey's team from the outset. Davis would give them no unilateral power at all to negotiate and conclude treaties. They were empowered only to meet foreign heads of state and present their case for independence and recognition. Implicit, of course, was the veiled threat that there might be a cut in the supply of cotton to Europe's mills otherwise. Even Toombs thought it pointless. He wanted to offer Europe possible lures like favored nation trading status, and for the first time found himself in agreement with Robert Barnwell Rhett, who chaired the Foreign Relations Committee. Rhett wanted the lowest possible import duties to be imposed at guaranteed rates for 20 years for nations that recognized the Confederacy, as well as free entry into Confederate ports. When Rhett found out that Davis's instructions to Yancey embraced nothing of the sort, he stormed to his friend's house and told him he had no business even going abroad if he had nothing to offer. As if those hindrances weren't enough, dispatches from Robert Bunch, the British consul in Charleston, to Foreign Secretary John Russell derided Yancey as impulsive, erratic, and hot-headed, a rabid secessionist, a favorer of a revival of the slave trade, and a filibuster of the extremist type of manifest destiny. Yancey had indeed spent much of the 1850s agitating for a revival of the African slave trade. Interestingly, however, Yancey biographer Eric H. Walther notes that at Alabama's secession convention, Yancey claimed to have changed his mind. With no more sectional conflict, with a homogeneous people accustomed to slavery, holding it in reverence for its origins and its effects, the need to obtain more slaves beyond natural reproduction no longer existed. The convention voted unanimously with Yancey's blessings to instruct its delegates to the February 4th meeting to press for a ban of the African slave trade. The ban did indeed make it into the Confederate Constitution, as we've discussed in a previous video, and Yancey's reversal on the issue reminds me of what historian Emory M. Thomas called the Confederacy as a revolutionary experience, writing that for 4 brief years, Southerners took charge of their own destiny. In so doing, they tested their institutions and sacred cows, found them wanting, and redefined them. In a sense, the Confederacy was the crucible of Southernism. Shortly after Yancey's arrival in London, word reached Britain about the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. This was followed by news of Lincoln's call for 75,000 troops to subdue the rebellion, which prompted the secessions of Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Confederates soon decided to move the capital from Montgomery to Richmond, Virginia, thus dashing Yancey's hopes for his dairy business. Walther writes that Britain's uncertain role in the American drama suddenly became murkier. Prime Minister Lord Palmerston and Russell had despaired over the prospect of an American Civil War, both on humanitarian grounds and for the trade and diplomatic complications that were bound to adversely affect their empire. With the secession of 4 more states, the Confederacy became a much more formidable military power, and the remaining truncated Union that much weaker. And however questionable Yancey was as the chief Confederate commissioner to Europe, Lincoln's new Secretary of State, William Henry Seward, represented a powerful counterweight. As early as January, the mere thought that Lincoln might select the feisty New York senator infuriated the British. I have more about the tensions between Seward and Britain in this week's companion post on my website, which you can access for free by clicking the link in the description below the video. For now, suffice to say that Seward's bellicosity unwittingly helped pave the way for 2 meetings between Russell and the Confederate commissioners, resulting in Britain's decision to grant the Confederacy status as a belligerent, though stopping short of full recognition as a sovereign nation. France soon followed suit. Still, those conversations and others made Yancey realize that British public opinion was entirely opposed to slavery, and that the sincerity and universality of this feeling embarrasses the government in dealing with the questions of our recognition. Pierre Rost, whom Yancey sent on to Paris, found a similarly mixed picture, and it would soon become clear that Britain and France preferred to act in tandem with regard to the thorny diplomatic issues surrounding recognition. Meanwhile, Yancey was able to cultivate an alliance with John Laird, a member of Parliament who owned a shipbuilding company with his brothers, Walter writes. By June 1862, Confederate agents contracted with the Laird brothers to construct a cruiser named the CSS Alabama, which proved devastating to Union ships. Later, the Laird shipyards also produced 2 ironclad rams for the Confederacy. Laird and Yancey got along so well that the former had Yancey visit his country home for a few days in May. Despite the many critical drawbacks that Yancey had as a diplomat, clearly his unusual personal fascination and influence worked well in small official circles. Nevertheless, it was clear to Yancey by late August that recognition would depend on the tide of war, not diplomacy, and he decided to resign his commission and return to Alabama, although due to delays in communications in the arrival of his replacements, he was not able to leave until February 1862. Summarizing Yancey's diplomatic tenure, Walther writes, "Considering Yancey's lack of experience, scant preparation, propensity to explode emotionally, and the insubstantial backing of the Davis administration, he certainly performed better than most could have imagined, and as well as anyone could have under the circumstances. He restrained his temper and his natural inclination to take the stump for a cause. He proved disarming, if not charming, to hostile and skeptical listeners. Yancey worked as a team leader, and for the first time in his life aimed at accomplishing the possible while striving for the ideal, rather than the other way around. He opened and maintained dialogue with politicians and established important connections with financial and industrial leaders." Nevertheless, Yancey returned to the South disheartened by his realization that, important as cotton is, it is not king in Europe. When he disembarked in New Orleans, he told a crowd, "We cannot look for any sympathy or help from abroad. We must rely on ourselves alone." The Alabama legislature elected Yancey to the Confederate Senate. Walther writes in his book The Fire Eaters that he arrived at the Capitol in Richmond a month later, still haunted by the failure of his mission. Hopeless despair was written on his face, a friend remembered. The failure affected him like a personal execution. He seemed literally to have perished with his hopes. The concluding episode of our William Yancey series will focus on his experience as a Confederate senator. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, hit that like button, and share this video with anyone who might be interested. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.